Talking nerdy. We're just talking nerdy. With all this talking nerdy. Oh, come on, you wanna talk nerdy?
One of the things I've learned as we have done stuff together, and one of the cool things about us doing this podcast together, is that you and I didn't know each other very well when we first launched into this. So Nerdpreneur has been a great opportunity for you and I to learn each other, to learn about the podcast, what it's going to become, and learn about the people that we're interviewing.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like the start of a breakup. I don't know. It's like, let's record how Nerdpreneur is. I'm only now realizing this is not working out and our goals are not aligned. No.
I actually think it's, yeah, right. It does sound like that. No, but one of the things that was kind of a breakthrough for me in this, so we recorded earlier this weekend and we were actually talking, funny enough, talking about dating apps and online dating. But no, I'm not planning to talk about that. I wanted to just say that a kind of a light bulb that went off for me is you excel as a guide, as someone who leads people to the answers they need or that they need to hear at least. And it's not something that I've ever really had. I've never really asked you to turn that attention on something that I'm working on. And given that you and I are so much driven in a similar way, there's not a lot of other people I can talk to that would really get this. So I feel like bouncing these ideas off of you is going to hit a depth that it wouldn't with other people. So today I wanted to talk about goals, and not just goal setting like we did at the turn of the new year when we talked about New Year's resolutions and stuff. This is more like goals for one's future to fulfill their life in a way that is fulfilling and meaningful. And there's a bunch of different philosophies around this. So that's the stage I wanted to set.
Well, first off, thank you, Frank. And if you were trying to make my day sound better or be better, you have succeeded already by buttering me up with some compliments before diving into something I may or may not know anything about. So I'm excited to see where this conversation goes.
Yeah, me too. I think, the two of us have actually spent a good amount of time on our own thinking about goals. And not just, like I said, that New Year's resolution of, okay, for me, it's this year I'm going to read 3,000 pages. Like, that's a nice goal, but like really, it leans into learning, which is an important value of mine. But more so, I think having goals like what I'm talking about, and for a little bit of context, and Chris, because we haven't really talked about this, tell me if you haven't heard of what I'm about to say, but I'm sure you have, which is the idea you've got like 6 different categories of goals in your life. You've got career, you've got finance or money, you've got family, spirituality, recreation or fun. You have these different areas. And Hero on a Mission is a book I mention a lot. And Donald Miller does a really good job of saying, find these 6 areas, define them for yourself 1 year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and look at it like a movie. If this was a movie, where would you want to be at the end of the movie? And I did this exercise about 1.5 years ago, and my life has changed a lot since then. So much so that I actually need to reevaluate it completely. But I did review them, and there are some values that have stayed the same. But why I think this is so important is because when you set goals for ourselves, we tend to actually work proactively towards a desired outcome. Because this idea came up because last night I was laying in bed thinking, I don't know my goals and I don't know where I'm heading specifically. So in that case, everything I'm doing is reactive. And reactive only like deals with the things that are hitting you in that moment. It doesn't really lead you in a particular direction. So I wanted to have those goals and I wanted to have this talk with you since we had a scheduled recording session. I thought, God, great opportunity. So yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that in the past you've had goals, and life has happened in the last year, but this means now that we have to shift and reevaluate in some ways for the next 5 years because of that major shift. Whatever's been going on last year, you just don't feel like you're maybe the same person or maybe the same goals as it was before. So now there's a need to kind of recheck in with yourself and get back into alignment with like, what do I really want for the next year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, or, et cetera, all the way down the line to my 80th birthday, where I get to see my whole family and all the things that I created and everything has gone perfectly well.
And all of my past flashes before me.
Yes. Well, what's great is if you do fast forward to that 80th birthday and you say like, look at all these things and all these accomplishments and all these people and relationships that I've created, what would that person say, or what would that person want at that moment? And to be able to feel, say, proud or excited about the fact that they had lived their life. And I guess the real thing is that 80th birthday, what we all want to feel is contentedness, I guess. That idea of looking back on our lives and saying, no regrets. I did it all that I wanted to do. Now, I think it's sort of like believing in Jesus or something. I don't know. It's sort of like,
yeah,
maybe I shouldn't say Jesus, but like, it's sort of like, this mythological figure of, the future of this thing that we all get to, this perfect 80th birthday. We get to, is it going to be that? No, there's just no chance that no matter what we set, we won't necessarily have everything that we've ever dreamed of happen. And even if it does in some capacity, you look back on your life at 80 and will probably still have a lot of things that you wish had been different or maybe had some regrets. I don't think that that's something you can ever escape from the ravages of time as we go forward and forward and forward. But is it worthy to have a goal? Just like, there are some people who say, you don't need to believe in God. You just need to act as if you believe in God. And so there's, I think, a distinction there that, the belief in God itself, whether you believe in Jesus or not, is actually inadvertent whether or not he actually existed. But the idea of believing in him is good for you morally or whatever it is. I don't know that perfectly works if you believe. I'm not really religious. I'm an atheist. But I think that there's something to that, setting the goal doesn't necessarily mean you always need to hit the goal in order for that to have value in and of itself in your life.
Right. Yeah. Just the pursuing of a goal does give you, it gives you that purpose, but it also gives you as much progress as you made getting to the goal.
There's a great planning quote, and I'm trying to remember exactly what it is. It's something to do with like planning is invaluable, but plans are useless. It's something like that, plans are useless, but planning is invaluable.
Yes. Oh God, that is so true for Dungeons and Dragons too.
It's true, right? It really, it's true for a lot of things in life, but Dungeons and Dragons for the Nerdpreneur podcast is a great grounding place to start the conversation. No.
Yeah.
So what also came up for me when you were talking was the idea of being reactive to things, right? And, can we talk a little bit about that? Because when you said, okay, I'm not feeling intentional, really, is what I think you meant. Because the opposite of reactive would be intentional or proactive, right?
Yeah.
To start looking at, okay, I have these goals in place. Like, let's just say 3,000 words in a year is, 3,000 pages in a year of reading, I believe is one of your goals we talked about in the first podcast. Yeah. And it's like, okay, am I being proactive about that and actually engaging with that every day and like setting aside time in order to do that? Would be the proactive thing to do instead of reactive and being like at the end of the week, it's like, oh crap, I got to read 70 pages by tomorrow or I'm off pace for my goal. Like that's a reactive situation. Can you tell me about how is reactivity showing up in your life?
Yeah. So I think I'll use the podcast as an example. We've been working a lot on our interviews and getting them ready to put out and share with the audience, and just kind of coming up with other topics for us to talk about or that revolve around nerdy stuff, business stuff, and just kind of what's happening in current trends. And we come up with these episode ideas, we put them out there, we do a thing, but it's also like, okay, but like, what's the goal that we're going towards? Like, yeah, sure, there's the big pie in the sky of growing the podcast. but more specifically, what are we going towards? And we've talked about things in the past, but I don't feel like we've defined something and put it on a placard on the wall and said, that's what this is for. That's what this task is working towards.
I guess if you're asking me, one of the things that I've been looking forward to saying is that we are the #1 nerdy business podcast in the world. We might already be. I'm not sure how many there are out there, but I really believe that that's a big deal.
I have heard you say that, and I was like, well, I haven't fact checked any of this, but I like the sound of it.
Yeah, right now I'm trying to position, at least we are the one and only nerdy business podcast. And I also think that if we get a little bit of ranking, that's good. I think you're right. Like maybe I have a little bit more of that vision and goal in mind than you do. And I think that might be because I see, and here's the thing, the thing you are talking about, and this is a distinction that you're like, in aid of what? Why are we doing this? In aid of what? Well, one is, I think, we are enjoying the process, and I have to start with that, in that, like, if I'm doing this podcast because I want to be rich, or I want to be famous, or I want to have this outside thing called validation or richness, or people who follow, like, that's kind of a consequence of doing something, in my mind, that we enjoy and that we love, and that I think brings value to our lives and ideally the people who listen to it. My view of it has always been like, if we don't enjoy the process of doing this, if we didn't actually enjoy talking, I think I said to you before that, like a couple weeks ago, I know you've been super busy and you've had a lot of stuff, but I'm like, I miss just talking, because this is where I get a lot of this ability to chat through important ideas, have intelligent conversations. It's not that I don't do that in my life, but I like having intentional times where I get to do that. It's not like, I'm not religious, but the idea of going somewhere and talking about morality for an hour or two on a day, and like thinking about life and thinking about goals and where you're going and how to be a better person. I love all that stuff about church. I just don't believe that there's God there. So, the point I'm trying to say here is, it's kind of like this. This is like the church side of it, where we get to intellectualize, we get to, think about goals or businesses and, achievement, and bring that positivity. And I think intentionally having those areas of our life where you are forced in some ways to focus on being positive and going for more, and a reason to grow, a reason to keep moving forward and getting bigger and getting better. To me, the podcast is a little bit of that. And I think there's a reason to do it in and of itself. Now, that doesn't mean I don't want to be rich and famous, Frank. Just so you know, I do think we should be rich and famous one day.
Of course, yeah.
But
I knew
that's not the
you.
reason to do it. You know what I mean? Like, it's not the only reason to do it. I do have ideas about where this could actually go, but the reason I'm bringing that up is because when you say, like, what's the reason beyond this? What I want to know is, like, what does that mean to you? Are you thinking like, well, in aid of increasing my financial station, or is it in aid of, making me a better person, or is it in aid of, like, helping people who listen to it and making it, like, what is the thing that you are looking for to be the reason to do it?
Yeah, there's a couple things. So for me, this is largely around, while there are these different categories of health was the sixth one that I forgot to mention. But there's, for me specifically, the things that come up are kind of career and finance for me. Those are things that I feel like I don't have a clear destination in mind. I mean, sure, people say with finance, well, I just want to make more. It's like, yeah, sure, you can always do that. But what does that actually look like? Why? And also the why that we've talked about. And then from the why, you get to the how. But the specifically, an example is that I had done the last time I did this was I had a goal of making 80K a year. That was my financial goal. But then it was not just 80K on its own. It was 80K. And then there were things underneath that, like invest in my own property, or, another example, I didn't have this, but is have a set number for your retirement that you've reached, so that when, you have money that you can lean on, because everyone wants to retire earlier. Okay, not everybody. Lots of people want to retire earlier than 65. So having numbers, specific numbers like that are what I like to do. And that's part of, SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. That is where I want to be with my own goals so that I have something to work towards. Now, tell me though, Chris, is that something that you think about when you come up with a goal? Do you get specific?
Yeah, I think there is real value in having specificity, and when you say SMART goals, let's just quickly give context to that because a lot of people don't know exactly what that is, but
Yeah.
SMART is an acronym for specific, all right, measurable, achievable, realistic, and tangible or time sensitive, time sensitive goals. And so when you say I want to set a SMART goal, you're really okay, it can't be just I want to make more money. It's got to be like I want to double my income and then give it a time lapse. Like, okay, I want to double my income in a year, 2 years, right? And so that's something that's like time sensitive goals. I set the intention that I wanted to double my income this year. And I didn't know how I was going to do that. I didn't really know if I mean, I do believe it's realistic though. And I think that's a belief thing. Having that R is really like, you have to believe it. So if I had said, I'm going to make $10 million, I'm not in that bracket yet. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm going to make $10 million this year. It's like, well, I don't know if I have the mental capacity to seriously believe that. It feels more like a pipe dream for me to say, oh, I'm going to make $10 million this year, with where I'm at in my life right now. But for me to say, I believe I could double my income in this year, I really believe that could happen. And I also know by going for something that, and to me, I also thought to myself, what would be exciting for me to go after? I need a reason. Like, the thing about goals that I think a lot of people miss is they look at it incrementally, and that realistic one always gets people. Like you might say, like, let's just use the 80K example. You might say, Chris, I really want to make my goals realistic, so I'm going to go after 100K this year. That's an extra $20,000. And that's not nothing. But here's the thing about it. If you make an extra $20,000, you're going to pay at least a third of that back into taxes anyway. Especially if you're Canadian, it might be even higher than that. Okay. So you're really not making $20,000 extra. You're probably instead actually just making an extra 10 or maybe $13,000 by the end of it. And then on top of that, like you might look at that and say, well, what is that even going to buy me? You might say, what's the point of making an extra $10 or $13,000? That's basically like you might have an emergency come around or a medical situation and that money's gone. It's almost like it's really not a very motivational thing in that way. And even though it is realistic. So one of the things I think is really, really important is that you have something that you're willing to go after and be excited about. And so the question I used to ask myself when I was in sales was like, what would get me up in the morning? What's exciting enough to give me a reason to wake up every morning and go in and do my job at the highest level? Like, because my vehicle for at the time was sales and making money. And so I would apply myself a lot higher for a goal of, for me, it was competition a lot of times. I wanted to be, say, the number one office in my division or in my district or for a push week or a challenge week, right? And then what would happen is I'd ask myself questions from there. It's like, well, what, and even if I wasn't likely, it was like, well, what would need to happen in order for that to happen?
Right. How to
And
get
then
there.
yeah, and what, and so that's why I said to myself at the beginning of this year, like I would like to double my income. Now, I just set that goal because I think it's much more exciting than like I want to grow it by a reasonable percentage of 10%. Like that's just boring to me. I'm not going to wake up early. I'm not going to put extra effort. I'm not going to produce 4 episodes a month. I'm not going to also do music. I'm not going to also work out. I'm not also going to do coaching on this. I'm not going to do all these extra things that become revenue generation models in my business. I'm not going to look for properties to invest in or, help other people. I'm not going to like all those things. I might do all that to double my income. Does that make sense? To really, really get excited about something. And will I double my income this year? I don't know. I hope so. That's really an awesome thing. It's a goal to go after. I'm excited about it. We're about almost halfway through the year. I'm making more money than I did at the beginning of the year, which is exciting. But is it on pace for me to be doubling my income? Not yet. But I know that by setting the intentions, I might wind up at that reasonable growth of 20% and actually get like an extra 10 or 15 grand. But I would never have got there if I didn't have that exciting goal at the beginning of the year. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think you have to be excited about what you're going for. And so
Absolutely.
I can ground this, and I do think we have some thoughts on the podcast. At least I have some thoughts that have been coming to me about where this thing could go as we build it and as we do more. And I really think that it'd be a fun discussion for us to have is exactly what it is that I see that way and why I get excited about bringing all these guests on and getting people excited about it. But I also want to make sure we leave here with you getting some goals and clarity around that.
Yeah, I think first off, totally agree with everything you said. Yeah, SMART goals are and you corrected me, which I appreciated when I said the acronym, I said relevant for the R, but yeah, realistic is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, originally I kind of knew like going through these 6 categories would just take way too long. It'd be a slog. It'd also be a really deep dive into my personal priorities, and I didn't feel like doing that. So I actually like that suggestion of us focusing on the podcast.
You know, what I think we can start down the path is that enticing vision we started the conversation with. You know, like, why are we doing this? Because like if you have a big vision, and that goal for me back when I was selling was like me holding the trophy, being number one on stage at this conference for whatever reason. Like there was a real significant reason for me to be like, and I knew that was a hot button for me was competition, for example, you know, and that's even here when I talk about, I want us to be the number one nerdy business podcast in the world. That's competition. Like, I just know that about me. I like to be competitive. I also believe that it drives me to my best work and to move forward. Like if there was another nerdy business podcast, like Entrepreneur or something out there, and they were beating us, I'd be like, fuck those guys. We're gonna crush them in the next year. You know, like that would be really cool. But maybe it's not that. Maybe it's other podcasts that we just need to like find that competitive edge for. But that's my style of setting a goal and a bigger vision. I also think though that that's not always necessarily very tangible for some people, and it's not a hot button for you maybe. So the reason I might do it doesn't need to necessarily be the same reason you do it. But I do think that we have to have that joy in the process, that we're enjoying this process to do it and keep going with it. And also recognizing that there is something bigger that we're working towards, you know? And I think that if we were to set this down as some tangible things, there's a couple things. There are goals that I think are good for us. And then there are also goals that I think are not just good for us, but also good for the people who listen. And I want to make sure that we actually include some of that because, you know, I think we're pretty mission driven, which is why we've been doing this not just for you know, a pittance right now, right? We've been doing a lot of free work because we are more mission driven, which is the concept of like we invest now to build something worthwhile. And we recognize that what we're trying to do is bring real positive impact to a segment of society. You know, like just going back to when we started this and when I originally started talking to you about the idea, it was because we were coming out of COVID and I had just seen dozens and dozens of people in specifically the Dungeons and Dragons market that had created these followings, had started monetizing those followings, and figured out over the course of time in COVID that they could turn their passion into a business. And they could start, and a lot of them never went back to their old way of life. There was like time before being a nerdpreneur, and then there was being a nerdpreneur. And I thought to myself, well, I also had put out a number of pieces of content around, for example, becoming a professional dungeon master. And so many people wanted to know, how do you do that? Like how you can get paid to play D&D? Like, what is that like? What does it really mean to do that? How do people make enough money to do that? And that combined with the Gary Vaynerchuk idea that if you can make $60,000 a year or $100,000 a year living your passion, doing what you really love doing, that's a worthwhile thing versus doing something like $5 million a year trapped in a business you don't actually enjoy and doing things you don't actually like. And so to look back on that and say, one of the reasons to start the podcast is to elevate the stories of people doing that so that they can believe it is possible for themselves. And to give those people who aren't the Grant Cardones and the Gary Vaynerchuk's and the, Tony Robbins kind of people, but just the people who are excited about their niche and have carved something out that's really unique and found success in a place where most people, would not. Like the fact that we talk to tarantula breeder or somebody who was a zombie magician or people who were you know prop makers, and discovered that they were able to actually make money and become a full-time income with this. And, we think about people like Monkey DM who, was in a desperate situation financially during COVID and emerged out of that as a person who's making way more money than he would have in his original profession, which was being a doctor in, I believe, Hungary or somewhere in Eastern Europe. Romania, yes, in Romania. And so these kind of stories, which are just to me super inspiring, that like you can actually go after your passion and actually do it, but there are pieces of science that help you do this, right? Like the science of business, which a lot of people do not know, the science of marketing. A lot of these people stumbled into it and learned throughout the rest of their lessons. And so part of the reason I wanted to do this is because I think we'll learn a lot through the process. We'll figure out through interviewing all these really successful people, what are some of the commonalities. It will show people it's possible, inspire people they can really do it, and they'll also learn enough from us that it'll be valuable for them to actually take that and apply it into their own businesses, and they get value out of it. And some of our upcoming interviews with Aether Objects, which may or may not be out by the time you listen to this, he is exactly our avatar, our person who listens to the podcast, is in a hobby niche and is trying to figure out how to make this thing as big as possible. And really, like, he was a perfect example of what it means to be an avatar for our podcast and who we want to impact. And yeah, that's my first thought, is that my goal is to really spread that message that you can go after your passion and make a business out of it. You don't have to resign yourself to the previous paradigm of go get a degree, find a job somewhere, get experience. Maybe eventually one day you have enough money that you can go and start your own business and do it. No, I'm like, just go do your passion now and figure it out and work hard towards it. And there are ways to be able to do it. And weird stuff that you never would have believed could be a business or is a business nowadays.
Yeah.
And I want us to be able to showcase that. So the weirder, the better in terms of the nerdy businesses. People don't expect to be able to, can you make money doing tabletop RPG music? Yeah, you can. You can actually do that. Can you make tarot cards on the side and do your own custom sets and art and actually make money doing that? Like, yeah, you can. There are people like this person. I bought a tarot deck of all octopus stuff off them. And it's like, that's crazy that that's your job, but that's what you do. Like, so many businesses are weird and unique, and I think those need to have some form of highlight so people get inspired to say, well, why can't I go, make a hot sauce business?
Yeah, I think it's really nice that we do that. I mean, elevating these stories. I really like that word that you chose, elevate the stories of nerdpreneurs that are making a living where most would be too afraid to go.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like that final frontier in a way. So I had to bring it back there because we're listening to Todd's episode right now.
Yeah, I know. Star Trek is still grounded in all of our episodes in some way, I think.
Yeah, that was kind of that was an asterisk of me coming on board with this. Was Star Trek will be in everything somehow.
Can you believe that there is someone who's out there making full-time income off of Star Trek? Like, there's not, and he's not even the only one, right? Like, there's dozens of people in that niche that are just doing different things, whether it be, costume stuff or prop stuff or collecting stuff or, people who are running tabletop RPG games. Like, there's just a lot of businesses within that niche. There are people running live events. I think about people like D&D in a Castle and how many more Dungeons and Dragons events, live events, are now becoming a thing. And there are companies that are not Wizards of the Coast that are going to be running tabletop RPG events over the next 5 to 10 years. And how much bigger that's getting, how much more exciting that's going to be. And so to me, that's sort of where I think Nerdpreneur can also go, is into the events area where not only do we get to go to events, network with people, but maybe get to interview people on stage or be asked to make an appearance for something. I'd love to do a live show down the road where we interview really cool local people and we get an audience in front of us. I think that it would be really awesome to have that level of things go in that direction as we build an audience.
Yeah, and that actually touches on one of the first goals I'd like to kind of set for the next year, which is hosting or interviewing at a live event. So
Mm-hmm.
whether we host a panel or whether we interview someone on stage in front of an audience, that's what I'd like to do that at least once within the next year.
Yeah.
And I think that's realistic. So specific, just to break it down real quick, specific, it's one hosting or one interview at a live event. Measurable, one, the number. Achievable, I think it's very much achievable. In fact, I would even almost want to push it to 2 or 3 in the year. And then relevant, yes, it's very much relevant. It gets us out there. It gets us more well-known. And then time-bound within 1 year.
Yeah. Well, the next thing I think is in alignment with that is not only just maybe going to these events or being asked to host, but I actually think we should run one of our own events.
Yeah, we've talked about that.
And this is one of those things where, we have every single one of our nerdpreneurs and more to come, right? Many of them have continued to grow their businesses after talking to us, right? Many of them are still in contact with us and still good people that we enjoy talking with. And we are maintaining and creating these connections. And I think that it would be interesting for us to run a summit or something where, we had a number of people all together for a day. And we could do it virtually because a lot of people all over the world we've interviewed. But to do it virtually and people get to hear different subjects from different nerdpreneurs. And then, of course, we get to share our insights. We get to have these people present what they're really good at. And then we invite a number of people to, we could run paid ads towards people who are interested in, for example, becoming a professional dungeon master, or people who want to learn how to turn an art passion into a business, or how to turn, their nerdy hobby into a successful, viable business, how to build a following from scratch on various platforms and really get good at that. Like there are things that and what are the most important things to be doing in, say, running a Kickstarter? Because, we have connections to some people who have had some really successful projects that they must have learned a tremendous amount. And if we're able to, get them to come in and speak on this kind of thing and sell tickets, I think that could be a really awesome opportunity, not only for us to give back to the community, but to also create more nerdpreneurs, which is, I think, the other side of this. It's not just to elevate current nerdpreneurs, but also to help create and inspire other nerdpreneurs. I really believe nerdpreneur can be a movement in the next 10 years where people, where you just say that word and people get what it is. It's like, oh, what are you? You're a nerdpreneur. Okay. Oh, it's somebody who's clearly in more of the nerdy space, but is following their passion, figured out how to make a certain amount of money doing it, and has found success. And they I think they live on their own terms with their own rules of things, and they pursue their passion, and it makes it sometimes very, very successful businesses.
I mean, this summit idea kind of came into, God, we were talking about, actually, it was right along the same vein. We were talking about hosting or interviewing at a live event, and then talking about why don't we do our own and make it virtual so it's more accessible, and also just our guests don't have to travel to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
a lot cheaper too, by the way, a lot less risk.
Lot cheap, yes.
Yeah, well, I'll just have someone who's been involved in both in-person live events, rental spaces, and all the complications.
That's right.
I would love to do a live event in person one day, but to proof of concept, to get this thing going and to really start at least building up what it's going to be, virtual is just so much cheaper and safer from a risk perspective, because we aren't making crazy amounts of money, and I'm not interested, and I don't really want to be in a situation like D&D in a castle where, they are super stressed out running these events sometimes because of the really high risk numbers that go along with it. And to me, that just doesn't, I mean, I appreciate they've done it. I appreciate that they have done that and have found ways to do it and be successful. I don't know how mentally they are continuing to be excited about it. Maybe it's just that's what it is. I don't want to be in that situation where I always say, build the house you want to live in. And to me,
Yeah.
that may not be the house I want to live in. I think it would be eventually really cool to hire an event company that really does it with us, so we don't have to handle a lot of those logistics. But the key is like we could start with virtual and we can be able to build from there.
I kind of want to ground this a little bit more specifically. So I think that this idea of a virtual summit is super awesome. I think it aligns really well with the values that we have, with our mission purpose, mission driven podcast that we are. Now, to make this a reality, I kind of want to ground it in what a timeline of it looks like, not in detail. I just mean like very vaguely, like, do you think it's achievable within a year given everything else we're doing and our own personal like jobs and personal lives? Or is a year just a little too short? Because that's how I feel.
My opinion is I'd like to do it sometime in a fall or closer to winter, just because virtual events I think will do better in that timeline versus summer.
Great idea.
Yeah, I think it can be done. It would have to be this coming fall or winter or the following one, I think. But where we're at, most likely probably be next year. I think that if people are interested in us, or if people are interested in being updated on these kind of things, like where we're going, what we're going to be doing, then they can sign up for our newsletter or opt into our, our email list, essentially, what we call the loot bag. Hey, Nerdpreneurs, Chris coming at you. If you'd actually like to know a little bit more about upcoming events that we might run, or maybe you want to sign up for that monthly loot bag that we were just talking about, go to professorepic.com/loot bag and you can sign up there. We send out one loot bag a month, and every loot bag has some gold, some XP, and a magic item. Plus, we often throw in a surprise. So go to professorepic.com/loot bag and get your first bag today. Now back to the episode.
And maybe it actually could be this coming fall or winter. I could see that happening. And what would be really nice is if we did a live event shortly before it, so we could build up a little bit of hype. That'd be great.
Like, how big do you think we really need for this to be successful? Because it doesn't need to be 1,000 people for us to run this event. It could be 100 people. And that's probably enough for us to run our first event where we bring in, 3 or 4 speakers, we talk each for a little bit, and we give some real value to people. It doesn't have to be expensive either, So we can go through and see, but what I will say is we'll probably asking for some money to be able to get people to commit to it. I know one thing for sure. If you say it's free, nobody shows up. So
yeah, so true.
And of course, there's going to be expenses involved in that, whether it be from having the minimum of a Zoom thing, or maybe we run it even on a Discord server. Like, it's hard to know exactly what it would be, but I imagine there's going to be some costs involved in setting up something like that so that it really works. How cool would it be, though, if we had like the ability to run something where there was a community element, and then the people who went to it also got to be part of like a Nerdpreneur Discord where they got to continue sharing ideas, and we also introduced them to opportunities to meet other nerdpreneurs down the road or continue to get value after the event, right? Like, that's kind of where I see this potentially going, is like, oh yeah, if people wind up paying to come to one of our events, then they also could, join a level of membership with us, or they could go down the path of, being in some of our community, and building a brand around that. And I think that that not only is community a really important part of this nerdpreneur growth, is that, knowing and seeing and hearing other nerdpreneurs that you're a part that are doing the same thing and dealing with similar challenges and getting the chance to be, I guess, around people that relate to what you're doing, because you could talk to people outside your life about what you're doing and they just don't get it. Like, you might talk to them about the idea of, putting up 30 reels around, making mimic books. just and they're just like, what are you talking about right now? And it's like, well, I'm building my following, and the idea of creating a funnel for people on your email list or through your Instagram that allows them to, potentially opt in for your membership site or give you subscribers. Like, it's just nice to be around people who also get what you're talking about and understand that, versus being alone. Because entrepreneurship is a lonely journey, and nerdpreneurship is probably lonelier because we're antisocial. So, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and we're introverted. So it's just like the only people I can talk to about Star Trek are other Star Trek people. Nobody really gets Star Trek, and then they definitely don't understand what it means to be a Star Trek podcaster. How the heck did like? And it's just understanding this is a community building process. And as I know, there's tons of you out there. I know every time I talk about this with people, they're saying like, oh yeah, I know somebody who wants to do that, or oh yeah, I've always heard about Dungeon Dragon. I've been curious about what is that? And their eyes widen when you tell them how much money is wrapped up in this hobby. And I think that the rest of the world just doesn't know it yet. They just don't know how big the nerdpreneur market really is and how many people want to just do that. There are people who want to write fantasy novels. We could get professional fantasy novelists on to talk about how they got started and where they went. How cool would that be? We could talk about people who are running courses on, making fantasy art, or we could have people who are selling their original works of art. Like, there's a woman I want to get on the podcast, and I'm pretty sure, because she follows us back on our Nerdpreneur Instagram, I'm pretty sure she knows who we are, and I'm pretty sure she's going to want to be on there. But she does art that are iconic moments within nerddom. So it might be an iconic moment from a Star Trek show. It might be an iconic moment from Alien, or it might be an iconic like from or Terminator, or any of these, or Doctor Who, like something like that. But she's a great artist. She does renditions of a moment from like a TV show that's a nerddom, and she just sells original works, and prints. And so, and for her, it's a really viable business. I know that like it changed her life forever to just get one. Like, I already know some of her story, so I'm excited to get her on the podcast to talk about that. We just had a lot of artists lately, so I want to. But there's so many great examples. Like, we could run a Nerdpreneur Artist Summit just on that alone and focus just on artists and help so many artists make so much more money. I mean, how many artists out there have followings, but they're not making enough just because they don't know how to market, or they don't know how to turn people into emails. They don't know how to turn people into a funnel where they could potentially launch their art, or they bring people into their next collection where people bid on their collections and stuff. And so, because we're bringing value, we could run an event where both of us speak and share what we're doing and what we think people could do. And then we also bring up examples of people who have been doing it, and they share what's working for them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there could be a real, like, you could go to a summit and over 2 days, like, revolutionize your artistic business in the fantasy world.
Yeah, and I love the idea of also, I mean, yes, with everything you said, and the having some sort of Q&A session, because that's one of the cool things about something like this is I envision that this wouldn't be so massive that it would be impossible to answer Q&As, but it would be a sizable size, man. It would be big enough to where we would have enough people there with their own burning questions. And it would just be like a panel, at a live event. You get people who want to walk up to the mic, they get in line and they ask their question, whether it's good or bad. I've definitely asked some bad questions at panels, and then they make fun of me, and I'm like, yeah, that was a dumb question. Anyway, but we wouldn't make fun of people.
No, we'll be very supportive and nice, unless you ask stupid questions. No, no, I actually think we should. We should want our events to be chonky. Like, I think we want to make
by that.
Well, just a little fat. You know what I mean? Like, not we don't want a gigantic 1,000-person event for our first event. I'll just say that. Like,
I see.
I think we want a chunky event. I don't want it to be a thin, small event. I want a chunky event. That's all. I thought chunky was a nice way to put it when you were saying
I would have said more like jacked. I want it to be like, or lean even. Like, I want it I want it lean. I want it to the point. I want it dense. I want a lot of stuff happening. And I don't want it to. Yeah, I think it would be great. I mean, we're not going to have like crazy product placement in there taking up space. We're not going to have that level of complexity. It's going to
No.
be like our guests getting to, they'll pitch their services and what they do. So it gives them a chance to do some marketing as well. But it also gives a chance for them to impart some value to people aside from just the products that they create.
I love that so many are people that we actually know in this nerdpreneur space. They're not salespeople, like
Right.
if we bring all these people together, they're not going to be in there like doing pitches. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh man, like Monkey DM is going to go in there and just like sell you all on his. And by the way, the thing he has to offer is like $10 a month. Like it's like so cheap to begin with that,
Yep.
if he just mentions it, most people would probably be like, oh yeah, for sure. Let me check it out and see. The point I'm just trying to say is it is exposure for people. It's great for the nerdpreneurs, but for the people who are showing up, that's what we want to do is provide a tremendous amount of value so that you can change your life and become a nerdpreneur and we get to interview you. Like we want to get actually more people through what we're doing so that we can highlight your stories at our next event. Like that's the whole idea. It's like go to this event next year. It's twice the size, and you're on stage. Do you know what I mean? Like it's that building process, and then maybe it becomes something that we run multiple times, and and I think that there's a value for potentially people who get along this path, them wanting to be in a higher end group with people. That's what we call a mastermind, and I think a nerdpreneur mastermind one day where people come together a few times a year in person to do really cool, fun, nerdy events, but also to really be high value learning events too, so that they're in a room with all these other people who are similar to them, but like excited about building their business, talking about the latest and greatest trends and latest and greatest tactics. Like that's where I think this could build to, where, we get a group or community where people want to actually be in that level of room, and they would pay to be excited to, or they would be excited to pay to be in that level of room and be around great people. And we bring in special guests and we bring in experts and we bring in people and we do in-person stuff where, maybe it's at like a con or things like that. There's just tons of really cool things I could see coming out of it.
Yeah. I mean, you touched on kind of, where this could go, and that does address kind of what I think. So whenever we get beyond, because I want to turn this towards the 3-year and the 5-year real quick, because we've established a really nice foundation of this vision. Now, we've talked about the 1 year, and I always find that this is where the practical turns into the theoretical, because the practical is something that we can immediately take action on. But once we get theoretical, we're like, okay, this is dependent on how the practical goes. And if the practical goes one way or the other, we're going to then figure out, okay, the 3-year and the 5-year might actually completely change. So the 3-year.
That's why I think sometimes it's not always useful to go after 3 or 5 years. Sometimes
I know.
it is,
I
but
just want
sometimes
to.
not.
I think this is helpful for just kind of as a brain teaser and a bit of an exercise, because I'm curious if, just to kind of do a bit of a brain mapping or a thought web. What are they called, Chris?
Mind map.
Thank you. Of the whole, like, okay, a 3-year, 5-year. Does that mean that we do this like 3 times a year? I don't think so. I think that the goal is once a year, because I like the idea of what you said about things being in the winter versus in the summer when people are trying to enjoy the outdoors, unless you're in certain parts of the world where the outdoors in the summer is unbearable.
Or if you live in the southern hemisphere,
Right,
like where the
totally
seasons
different.
are completely different. So I mean, but that might be more Spanish because there's a lot more Spanish people in the southern hemisphere. So we'll see.
What are you talking about? There's also Australia. There's various parts of Africa.
There is, but all I'm saying is like for us in our time zones, it's most likely going to be South America. That's all. That's all I'm saying. It's like most of the people who probably would align with the actual time that we run this thing would probably be in the South America area, which is why I'm saying most likely Spanish speaking, maybe Portuguese.
Gotcha. That makes more sense. It sounds like you're not a huge, you don't think about the 3-year, 5-year very much, but I like to, just because it's kind of fun to think about it.
Well, if we can get ourselves emotionally excited about where it's going in 3 to 5 years, that can be great. But but I think that the only thing is, it's very likely that we will need to pivot or shift, or things will change as we go together with it. Like there's lots of ways in which, right now we got a Patreon, we're building that, and that's great. We have people who are supporting us there, and we appreciate it. Is Patreon a long-term place that we want to live? I don't know that it is. I've expressed this to you on the non-mic, right? The off mic, that I don't know that Patreon is necessarily the long-term solution for us because of a number of factors there. One of which is that they don't integrate well with Spotify, which is like the number one music listening, podcast listening platform out there. And so, should we potentially use a different place for us to start building and having people support us? And my opinion is that, yeah, probably we need to make that switch at some point within the next 6 months or so, as we continue to get more patrons, as we continue to kick out more value and more people like what we're doing. And so there are pivots that we need to make. And we might also learn that, membership stuff and gated content may not be that valuable to us. Like we could build that for a year or 2 years, and it might only make us $1,000 a month split between two people and minus expenses. Like it may not be actually a very viable long-term, monetization strategy. So there are things that I'm thinking about from that perspective of like, yeah, I would love for people to support us there. And it is a great way for us to continue doing what we're doing. And it's a great way to have more and awesome content if you like it. And so, yeah, sign up. We love our patrons. Our board is amazing, and keep doing that. However, maybe long term, we'll have other monetization strategies that help us get into the realm of real business, like a mastermind, like a live event, like appearance fees, like running live shows or live interviews where we go to a place like and interview real, like live stream entrepreneurs or nerdpreneurs, right? That are interesting. Or maybe we wind up being invited to business conferences because we're making waves in the digital marketing universe. And maybe that's where we wind up, is that we actually go in as experts and share what we've learned through all of the things that we've learned from our nerdpreneurs. It's funny that by becoming higher value ourselves by doing the podcast, that might be where we go. The other area is we are learning how to podcast and how to monetize and how to build an audience. And we're doing pretty well with it. I hate to say, but I just, I've done this a few times and I think we're pretty darn good at it. Well, that's a marketable skill. We could launch a how to launch your podcast course and probably teach people how to do that themselves. That might be a Nerdpreneur podcasting summit, or it might be a Nerdpreneur podcasting course, or it might be a Nerdpreneur podcasting mastermind, but it could be around that skill level, and there's tons of stuff that could be mapped out in the future. I just think we want to stay agile. I'm not saying we shouldn't have an idea for the future. I just have so many ideas about where it could go that it's hard for me to say like, oh, Frank, yeah, we're definitely going to have this arm of the company and this arm of the company and this arm of the, it would be really cool if we knew all that. I just think we need to be agile and sort of go where the flow of investment and popularity and what people really want is going to take us.
Yeah, what people really want. I was thinking that earlier as you were talking, that is where this whole theoretical area starts to fall apart of 3 to 5 years. And maybe that's what you were thinking when you said that about 10 minutes ago. The idea of like, okay, this stuff is great until you realize that actually what we thought we would be doing is so different from what people would like us to be doing that aligns with our mission.
Yeah. We're guessing right now on a lot of things. We're just sort of like, hey, this is a great episode. Let's just put half of it out here and then half of it out here. And if you want the full thing, give us $10 or whatever. It's not complicated what we're doing. We're just trying to get feedback and what works. And as we come up with better and better episode ideas, providing more and more value, we're going to find out that people, they might love that. One of the things we're talking about and actually doing is these book summaries I talked about, because we talked about, we had Man's Search for Meaning, the book here that we talked about briefly in one of our previous episodes. And I thought, well, why don't I just do a summary of that book and record it as an audio? And it's like under 10 minutes and you can be able to go get that if you're a patron. And that might just be another thing. Maybe we move people into a membership site where they get access to all this extra cool gated content or maybe we archive our first, 30 or 40 episodes and make that a package that people can then opt into to be able to subscribe and get those as we continue to bring out new episodes and get the latest people. So there's lots of ways that we might go in order to monetize. Again, our audience is going to be king. Like, we have to build the audience and then figure out where do people and what do people want us to do. The one thing I guess I'm still fairly hesitant about is ads. I just don't like ads. And I don't like the ad model. I think it's ruining a lot of online society. And part of me, is saying I don't ever want to run ads. But part of me is also like, no one's offering us thousands of dollars in order to run an ad either. And so, maybe that might change, especially if, we're in a position where it's a company I believe in. I really think they're awesome. And I actually do want to advertise for them and they're going to pay for it. So I can't say I'll never run an ad. I can say right now, we have no ads on the podcast. We have no plan on bringing ads to the podcast. Not interested in that.
Yeah, I think kind of the direction, I mean, ads is that's a beast because, the market and the environment for podcasting, so much of it revolves around ads happening in that way around the number of downloads and listens. But yeah, we haven't really dove into that yet. We haven't really needed to. And it is a conversation for another point. But I did just want to say that I think that what we've already talked about, whether it's the live events or our virtual summit, those right in there give me a good kind of compass, a guiding point. They're not just milestones. These are goals to aspire towards and things that can bring up in conversation with people that are interested to build intention and interest in these things that we want to do. I think it's a lot easier to do those things once we have something similar under our belt that we can say we've done it already. And of course, what we're doing does overlap with what we want to do, but it's a lot easier to say, hey, I'm looking to host another event as opposed to I'm looking to host my first live event. It's that proof of concept kind of needs to be there somewhere. So and I think that's where the summit would really be helpful is we've got our own summit that we've done and we want to be at some live events.
Yeah, well, and this is the thing. Like, if we just set the goal of like, all right, November 4th, we're going to run a summit. We're going to work a lot harder to get that to happen if we already know, like, committed to that date. And I'm just saying that because it happens to be the first Saturday in November. But it seems to me like that might be a day that could possibly work. I don't have a concert that day. It's a ways away. And you know what? There's lots of time to be able to build something towards it, to get people to opt in, get on our waiting list, get excited about it, potentially sell some tickets, commit some guests, get people together. And what's funny is if we just committed to doing that and rolling with it over the next 5-6 months, what's amazing is that we would do it and we would learn a tremendous amount. We might lose some money, we might make some money, we might mess up, we might but we don't know. But I think that the goal setting and like committing to a specific timeline where you're willing to fail is actually really important in this goal setting and building journey. And I think a lot of times we reach plateaus in our life because we're not willing to fail to move forward. And so there's a point where we both have to be able to say, I know I'm going to make mistakes with this. I know I'm going to fuck it up a couple of times. I know I'm going to maybe make some challenges into opportunities over the course of this too. And new things will emerge after. There'll be an echo after we do this of people that were positively impacted. There will be an echo of people who took notice and be like, whoa, that's really cool that they did that. And there'll be content that we've created that we could repurpose and use and cut up into, promotional material. We'll have the knowledge of having done it and all the mistakes and the ways to do it better the next time, so that when we go do it the next year, all of a sudden the thing is like 10 times better than it was the first time because we just got that first one under our belt, knowing it's going to be like, one of my sayings is the first is always the worst. So you have to be willing to be the worst in some cases to become better and then eventually the best.
And we'll have a foundation established, which will make the next time also easier because that foundation's there. And then you reiterate on top of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, November could work. I kind of envisioned more the dead of winter in January when everyone's like post holidays. The dates specifically don't matter, but for our listeners, I just want to say there's a discussion to be had here about when it will be.
Yeah, the benefit of the January, I will say, is that there's a lot of reasons to set new goals for the next year. People are often in a
Yep.
mindset of change.
Yep.
It is a good time to run an event in some ways. I will say I'm often running my own event, so I'm a little busier then, which
Ah,
is why
all
I know
right.
that it's a good time. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that I couldn't potentially run something. I just would need to know and be able to do it. And the other reason I would just say, Frank, is that when you have an event coming up, you do work hard on it and get stressed out about it, and that will carry all the way through your holidays.
I was wondering if you
Merry
intentionally.
Christmas.
I was.
So that's why I'm also like, maybe it's November so that it's done. We can have a month to like reflect on it, and then December is just like, oh yay, awesome, it's done. And we can just
That's
enjoy our
true.
holidays. So there's other reasons why I suggested it before. Again, this is a discussion, if you're listening, that will be happening, I guess, in the future. And I have my reasons. He has his reasons. I'm sure that we'll come to some sort of consensus on this. But the idea of having a date that we work towards, I think would be really great. And people can then, and again, if you want to be informed of this, just shoot us an email at nerds@nerdpreneur podcast, and we'll put you on the list to know more about the event as it comes together. Because we really don't know anything yet. You're really getting the behind the scenes of what this means to build a business and build a nerdpreneur podcast and go after a vision of where it could be and create something out of nothing. Like that's what this is. This is just you getting a little peek behind the curtain behind what we're doing and how we're thinking through this.
Yeah, I'm super glad we talked about this and that this came from just one of those nights of not being able to recognize the direction. Because I needed to talk about this kind of stuff with you again because it's
Mhm.
been so long. And so
Inspiration is like bathing. It should be done daily. It's actually important. It's more effective when it's done daily.
yeah,
And so I agree that sometimes, especially when we're working hard on stuff and there's not as much, like we're priming the pump over and over and there's no water coming out yet, or limited trickle of water, and we want like a gushing massive amount of water. Well, that's coming, but it does help us to remind ourselves of why we're priming the pump, why we're putting in the work, why we're doing this. And again, it's not just so that we can make money, it's actually so that we can have an impact on this community and create a community out of this where people can learn and grow and develop their own businesses, and we can have something really thriving that helps people really be happier in life, because I think a lot of people are unhappy.
I agree, man. I think a lot of people do get unhappy.
Yeah, and I think that we have to be willing to pursue what is meaningful and fulfilling. Well, I was listening to this recently on probably some other podcast or some YouTube video somewhere, but rates of suicide are massive compared to what they once were. But then on top of that, you have rates of addiction that are super high as well. And all different types of addiction too, from alcoholism to opiates to amphetamines to X number of things. And to me, all of that is really, there's an epidemic of despair in the world. And so when you hear that there's people that are, suicidal, that's the most extreme end of the despair.
yeah.
I think that, yeah, work might play a role in that. Not living towards your fulfilled passion or purpose can play a role in that. And not being able to make the money that you want for your family or for yourself and doing something happy. Like that balance. And I think that there's a real movement right now towards anti-capitalism because of all the toxicity of I have to make all this money, I have to work for these companies I don't like for X amount of dollars just to be able to pay for my food. And I agree that that is a problem, but I also believe that we can disrupt the whole thing through the freedom of capitalism and effective marketing, effective salesmanship, effective tactics and strategies that people can shift out of that, move towards their passion and find more fulfilling lives, more fulfilling more fulfilling things to spend their time doing, so that overall people are generally happier, more abundant, and more positive because their life is going in a direction they're excited about versus a way where there's no hope.
This is reminding me of another big thought I've had recently about, I feel like I've been seeing more theft and more bravery, not bravery, but more like desperation and courage around that desperation. What I've noticed is people are more willing to make drastic moves that are, would be categorized as criminal.
Hmm.
And I think that comes from a place of people. Things in the world right now they're always going to be stressful. There's always going to be things, but right now things are kind of at a level that's higher than it has been in a while. And with the amount of like layoffs that are happening, especially in the tech world, like people are getting desperate. It's a general consensus that people are getting desperate. And so what I'm getting at is that what you just said about anti-capitalism, people essentially enterprising in some way that they're excited about to make a buck, to make a comfortable living is great. Just as an example, I saw on a walk yesterday towards the water, there was someone that just had one of those Costco foldable tables out near the water. They had a Costco bunch of like chips, a couple like things of lemonade, a couple other sweet snacks, and they were just selling. Like, of course, no permit. But it was like this kid, he's a teenager and he's just making some money, and he probably invested $60 in this entire operation. And he had people that were biking by because it's a bikeway, and people would stop. They'd get a little sugar, they'd get a little snack, they'd enjoy the view. And they were underneath the shade of some big trees. And I was like, this kid is smart. He chose a great spot. It's not where like cops are going to be breaking anything up. And, he's enterprising.
Yeah.
And so it's that kind of stuff that I think us inspiring, us elevating and informing and entertaining is just super, super great. And I really want more people to learn about it. And I think that for me is really where I get jazzed. I get inspired.
Yeah. Well, and this is, you're right, a more challenging time. And because life has seasons, time has seasons, and we have been living in summer for a long time.
The gravy days, yeah.
Like there's been a long time of summer, and I'm talking all the 2000s, in a lot of ways. And I know it's not great for everybody out there. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying from like an economic overall standpoint, there's been, and from a technological standpoint, and from a lot of things in the last 20 some odd years, it's been abundance, abundance, abundance. And then what has shifted with the advent into the 20s is we move from summer to fall, and now it is winter. It is now winter from a lot of people's perspectives. And that old Game of Thrones saying, "Winter is coming," is real.
I would posit that it's actually winter's going to get even darker.
Yeah, it will be. I don't think really people get it. Yeah, but here's the thing, right? Winter is still a season. And so what we know is not only is winter coming, but winter does end. And so summer is also coming. And the thing is when you make the right moves and you do the right things when you are in winter, the summer is exponentially better.
Yeah, full circle. Great example is COVID. When COVID hit and people were locked up, people who succeeded that ended up inspiring a lot of this podcast were people who prepared. They lost their jobs and they did what they could from home. And Monkey DM is an excellent example of how that worked. Winter eventually ended. It flourished for him when he was in summer.
Yeah, and I think that it's really about, when things are the hardest, there are always still opportunities, and those who recognize and follow through on those opportunities, who do the right things, and I'll use an example of stocks just because it can ground this in an example. But there are a lot of people who during the Depression found ways to invest And what's really important is that when you do invest when times are tough in a stock market, a lot of people are like, oh, I'm going to keep my money out of the stock market when the stock market plummets. In fact, the time to invest more is then. And then when you invest and the stock market bounces back, all of a sudden you have got double the amount for half the price. And when it bounces back, you have 2 times or 4 times as much as what you originally had. And so if it's the people who stop investing during the down times that wind up becoming not really reaping the real rewards when things and times shift. And so recognizing that there are tons and tons of opportunities around where there are challenges. And it's not saying that, the challenges are done and the challenges are gone. No, there's always going to be challenges. But I will say, if you're living in the season of winter right now, there are ways to move forward and make choices now that will have massive impact on your life in 5 years and 10 years. And it's when you say setting goals and we think long term, I think more in terms of, am I making some of the right decisions right now that will really have an impact 5 or 10 years from now? At least I try to. You talked about health. Health is really important if you're making daily decisions about it. It doesn't show up for 10 years, 15, sometimes 30. But those daily decisions on what you eat, what you drink, what you smoke, what you do with your body, for example, all have impact 10, 15, 20 years down the line. And so same with investing, same with a business, same with what you're reading, who you're spending your time with. All of these things are choices we get to make on a day-to-day basis that have massive impacts down the road. And so I try to help people, I guess, when I talk through this, think about it like a golf ball. If you're hitting a golf ball with your club, a little bit of a difference in your angle of hitting it creates massive differences when it gets close to the green.
As it travels through space and time. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you shift your club face by a millimeter, it might put you 50 or 100 feet off of the green. And so a lot of you might only be a millimeter or two away from fixing your entire life in 10 years. And I say fixing. Maybe it's not fixing. Maybe it's getting to those goals, getting to those achievements, changing your life in some way that you want to change it. But that thing you're doing right now today, it has impact down the path, down the road. So I'm always telling people to check where's your trajectory right now and extend it out 10 years. If you're not excited about where that's going, then you need to change your trajectory today to somewhere where that's going to wind up where you want to be.
Yeah, well said. It has a lot to do with also those people that we surround ourselves with. And those kinds of moves sometimes can be small, but they can lead to huge changes.
Yeah. Well, grounding this in you again, Frank, because this is where the conversation started, was talking about your goals. I know we wound up talking about our goals, but when you look at your trajectory right now, do you see some pivots or shifts in things that you want to really make?
Oh, yeah. I mean, sticking to the example that we used of the podcast, I think that there is definitely some small changes that would help to align with where I want this to go. Meeting new people, eventually turning this into a substantial source of income, and making those connections that not only enrich my life, but the lives of others. Those are kind of the destinations I have. So making the small changes, this summit isn't a small change, but the discussion we just had was a small thing, and relatively, and that is going to lead to a huge shift. Just like in your analogy of golf, it's going to lead us much closer to, I think, where the hole is. I don't know golf terms, but it sounds like that's what they call it, where
Yeah.
you aim to put the golf ball. It is a hole.
Yeah, it is a hole. The pin is sometimes what it's called.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but you also get a hole in one, so I think hole is acceptable.
On that note, I was on a date and we were watching hockey. It was the playoffs. And I'm like saying something about, I was like, well, there's like 4 periods or something. And she's like, no, there's
No.
3.
Three.
And I'm just like, okay. And so now it's become this reoccurring joke of how I don't know sports. And
I've never been more reminded that you're not Canadian. I forget that you're not Canadian sometimes because we talk so often, and most of my friends are all Canadian, and you're like one of my few American like close friends. And man, you 4 periods. I'm just like, God damn it! I want to smack you through the Discord right now.
That was pretty much her face when I said it. Although she's not Canadian, she's through and through American. But she just gave me this look, kind of like, no. Like, you said that you used to watch hockey. Like, how do you not know that there's 3 instead of 4? Yeah.
No.
Yes, terminology is important, and it's a great demonstration of whether you do or do not understand something.
Yes, it is. It is.
I think that this is actually just a nice place to stop it.
So as far as goals, you got yourself aligned now. You feel?
I feel like this discussion really helped me kind of set my priorities, the destination, the goals of where the podcast could go. And that is actually what was keeping me up last night. So this was really great. And I'm glad we did this. And yeah, that was helpful. Thanks, man. So for everyone listening, have a great day. And as always,
Keep it nerdy.
Talking